Have you ever wondered who you're not seeing? When you walk into a crowded room, a bustling office, or an elegant restaurant, your eyes naturally gravitate towards the figures of perceived importance. The one in the tailored suit, the one with the confident laugh, the one at the head of the table. But what about the others? The ones in the periphery, the silent figures who blend into the background, their presence as functional and unnoticed as the chairs they wipe down or the water glasses they fill. We live our lives surrounded by these invisible people, each one carrying a universe of knowledge, a history of struggle, and a potential that we rarely, if ever, stop to consider. This is a story about what happens when one of those invisible people decides to be seen. It is a story about a quiet voice that roared louder than a boardroom of executives, and a simple truth that saved a fortune, a dream, and perhaps even a soul. It begins, as so many important moments do, with a simple meal in a place where wealth and power were the main course. Her name was Laila, and she was a waitress. To the patrons of the Gilded Cage, one of London's most exclusive and unapologetically expensive restaurants, she was little more than a pair of hands. Hands that refilled their champagne flutes with practiced stillness, that placed plates of meticulously arranged food before them without a sound, that cleared away the remnants of their indulgence with quiet efficiency. She wore the starched black uniform like a suit of armor, a cloak of invisibility that allowed her to move through their world untouched and, more importantly, unnoticed. Her face was pleasant but forgettable, her expression professionally neutral, her movements economical and precise. She was, by all accounts, the perfect waitress. But beneath the polished veneer of servitude, Laila was a scholar. She was the daughter of Dr. Omar Hassan, a once celebrated professor of linguistics and Middle Eastern studies from Damascus, a man who could taste the history of a word on his tongue and who saw language not as a tool for communication, but as the very soul of a culture. He had filled their small, book-lined apartment with the music of a dozen languages, teaching Laila the subtle poetry of classical Arabic, the lilting cadence of the Levantine dialect, the crisp authority of Egyptian, and the flowing, melodic tones of the Gulf. He taught her French and German, too, insisting that to understand a people, you must first understand their grammar. Then, the war had come, and their world of books and poetry was shattered by bombs and loss. They fled, arriving in London with little more than the languages stored in Laila's head and the crushing weight of grief in their hearts. Her father, a titan in the lecture halls of his homeland, became just another refugee, his spirits slowly eroded by the cold indifference of a new city and the ache for a life that was gone forever. He passed away within 2 years, leaving Laila with his debts, his legacy, and the responsibility of caring for her 2 younger siblings who were now with an aunt back in a safer, but still struggling, part of their region. So Laila became invisible. She worked 2 jobs, the prestigious but poorly paid evening shift at the Gilded Cage and a grueling early morning shift cleaning offices in the financial district. Every pound she earned was a small victory against the tide of debt and worry. Every smile she forced for a condescending diner was a shield for her pride. Every moment she spent in silence, she was listening. She listened to the broken English of the kitchen staff, the polished Queen's English of the patrons, the snippets of Russian, Mandarin, and Spanish from the international clientele. She collected their words, their intonations, their grammatical mistakes, analyzing them with the same academic rigor her father had taught her. It was her secret rebellion, a way of holding on to the brilliant, vibrant world he had given her, even as she served those who would never know its worth. She was a library locked from the inside, just as her father had once warned against, and she saw no prospect of a key ever being found. Tonight was no different. Laila moved through the hushed, opulent dining room, a ghost in black and white. Her focus was on table 7, the most secluded and sought-after booth in the restaurant. It was occupied by Tariq Al-Jamil, a man whose name was a quiet legend in the worlds of finance and philanthropy. He was a Saudi billionaire, but not the flamboyant type that graced the tabloids. He was a quiet, intensely private man in his late 50s, with eyes that held the weariness of immense responsibility and the faint, flickering spark of a relentless idealist. His wealth was old, but his ideas were new. He was pouring his fortune and his future into a revolutionary green energy initiative, a series of massive solar farms in the desert that he believed could power a new, sustainable future for his region. It was his legacy project, the culmination of his life's work, a dream he spoke of with the passion of a poet and the precision of an engineer. He was dining with two men who were supposed to make that dream a concrete reality. They were European investors, introduced through a supposedly impeccable source. Mr. Du Bois was French, slick and charming with a smile that seemed permanently affixed to his face. Mr. Schmidt was German, his demeanor more severe and analytical, his eyes constantly scanning, calculating. Accompanying Mr. Aljamil was his top advisor, an American named Harris, a sharp, cynical man who trusted numbers far more than people and who viewed his boss's idealism as a dangerous liability. Laila could feel the tension radiating from the table. It was a palpable force, cutting through the low hum of polite conversation and the clinking of silverware. Mr. Aljamil, usually a man of serene composure, seemed on edge, his fingers drumming a silent, anxious rhythm on the damask tablecloth. Harris looked even more stressed, his jaw tight, his gaze darting between the investors and his employer. The deal on the table was enormous, a $200 million final investment to complete the project. It was the keystone. With it, Aljamil's vision would be realized. Without it, the entire endeavor could collapse under its own weight. Laila approached to pour more water, her movements fluid and unobtrusive. The final schematics are flawless, Mr. Schmidt was saying in heavily accented but clear English. Our technical teams have approved every detail. The potential is, frankly, unprecedented, Mr. Du Bois chimed in, his voice smooth as silk. It is more than a business venture, Tariq. It is a statement. A legacy. We are honored to be the final piece of your magnificent puzzle. Mr. Aljamil nodded, a hopeful smile finally gracing his lips. It is everything to me, he said, his voice thick with emotion. More than a legacy. It is a promise to the future. Laila retreated into the shadows, her mind registering the exchange. But it was not the English words that snagged her attention. It was what happened when she turned away. Believing themselves to be unheard, shielded by the low din of the restaurant, Du Bois and Schmidt exchanged a brief glance. Du Bois muttered something to Schmidt in rapid, colloquial French. Le vieux poisson est bien accroché, he whispered, a smirk playing on his lips. The old fish is hooked good. Laila froze for a fraction of a second, her hand tightening on the silver water pitcher. It was a crude, dismissive phrase, a fisherman's boast. It was utterly at odds with the reverent tone he had used just moments before. She continued on her way, her mind racing. It could be nothing. A cynical joke between partners. Business was a hunt, after all. But it felt wrong. It was a dissonant note in a carefully composed symphony of respect. Her duties carried her around the room, but her senses remained tethered to table 7. She watched and she listened, her years of forced invisibility now serving as the perfect cover for her clandestine analysis. The men continued their discussion in English, outlining the final points of the agreement. The conversation was a dense thicket of financial jargon and technical specifications. Harris asked pointed questions about risk mitigation and fund allocation, his skepticism a tangible force field. But Du Bois and Schmidt had an answer for everything. They were polished, deflecting his concerns with practiced ease and redirecting the conversation back to the project's grand, inspiring vision, a tactic clearly aimed at Mr. Aljamil's idealistic nature. As the main courses were served, Schmidt leaned back, feigning a relaxed posture. He turned to Du Bois and said in German, Kauf die ganz Geschichte. Sobald die Tint trocken ist, laten wir die erste Tranche. He's buying the whole story. As soon as the ink is dry, we divert the first tranche. Laila's blood ran cold. Divert the first tranche. It wasn't a joke. It was a plan. Her heart began to pound against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat beneath her starched uniform. This was no longer just a feeling of unease. It was the cold, hard certainty of a crime in progress. She felt a wave of nausea. These men were predators, circling a dreamer, their smiles like the bared teeth of wolves. She glanced at Mr. Al-Jamil. He was glowing, his face illuminated by the joy of seeing his life's work on the verge of completion. He was explaining the humanitarian aspect of his project, how it would create jobs and provide clean, affordable energy to communities that had been left behind. He was not just signing a business deal, he was entrusting these men with his soul. The final, damning piece of evidence came with the coffee. In an attempt at cultural flattery, Mr. Du Bois decided to show off his linguistic skills. He turned to Mr. Al-Jamil, his expression one of profound sincerity. Mr. Al-Jamil. Tariq, he began. To show our deep respect for your culture and this partnership, we have been practicing. He then uttered a short phrase in what was supposed to be formal, classical Arabic. Baraka Allahu Fik, ya Siddiqui. Nanu, the phrase was meant to mean, may God bless you, my friend. We are committed. But what came out of his mouth was a grotesque caricature. It wasn't just a bad accent, the kind a foreigner would naturally have. Laila had heard hundreds of those. This was different. The guttural consonants were wrong, produced in the front of the throat instead of the back. The vowels were flattened, stripped of their music. The word for committed, multazimin, was mangled into something that sounded closer to multazimum, a meaningless, clumsy syllable. To a casual listener, it might have sounded impressive. To Laila, it was an alarm bell. Her father had spent countless hours teaching her the phonetics of pure Fuhsha, the classical Arabic of scholarship and prayer. He would make her repeat sounds for hours until they were perfect, explaining how a single misplaced glottal stop could change the entire meaning of a verse. What she was hearing from Du Bois was not the Arabic of a student. It was the Arabic of a bad actor who had learned his lines from a poorly translated script, coached by someone with no real knowledge of the language. It was a performance designed to mimic respect, but it was hollow to its core. It was an insult. He had spoken the words, but he had not understood their soul. Laila knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that these men were frauds. They had not spent time learning his language, they had spent time learning how to fake it. And if they would fake this, they would fake anything. A war raged within her. Every instinct screamed at her to stay silent. She was a waitress. A nobody. Her opinion was not just unsolicited, it was worthless in this context. Intervening would be a catastrophic breach of protocol. Her manager, a stern woman named Ms. Albright, had a zero-tolerance policy for staff interacting with guests beyond the narrow confines of their duties. You are here to serve, not to socialize, she had drilled into them during training. You are scenery. The moment a guest has to think about you is the moment you have failed. Failure meant termination. No references. Blacklisted. For Laila, it meant disaster. It meant the debt collectors would start calling again. It meant she couldn't send money home for her brother's schoolbooks or her sister's medicine. It meant the fragile stability she had painstakingly built would shatter into a million pieces. The image of her siblings' faces flashed in her mind, their hopeful eyes looking up at her. She was their lifeline. How could she risk it all on a suspicion, however strong? She could be wrong. What if she had misheard? What if it was just a cynical business practice, distasteful but not illegal? They would humiliate her, mock her. Mr. Al-Jamil would be embarrassed, and his anger would be directed at her, the source of the disruption. Harris would have her thrown out personally, his face a mask of triumphant disdain. She would be a cautionary tale whispered among the staff, the waitress who got too big for her uniform. But then she looked at Mr. Al-Jamil again. She saw the reflection of her own father in his eyes. Not in his wealth or his power, but in his dream. Her father had dreamed of preserving the beauty of language in a world that was growing deaf to it. Mr. Al-Jamil dreamed of preserving the beauty of the planet in a world that was poisoning it. They were both builders, men who saw a better future and dedicated their lives to creating it. And these vultures, these charlatans, were about to pick his dream apart for money. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, a quote he loved from an old Arab poet. To see a wrong and not to speak is to become a silent accomplice to it. What was the point of all the knowledge he had given her, all the languages, all the nuance and understanding, if she kept it locked away when it mattered most? It would be the ultimate betrayal of his memory. She watched as a sleek leather folio was brought to the table. The contract. Mr. Dubois opened it with a theatrical flourish, pushing it gently across the table towards Mr. Aljamil. A heavy, gold-nibbed fountain pen was produced from an inner pocket and placed beside the signature line. The moment was here. The final act of the deception. Mr. Aljamil picked up the pen. The restaurant seemed to fade away, the sounds muffled, the light dimming until the only thing in focus was that pen, that contract, and the hopeful, trusting hand that held it. Laila's feet felt rooted to the floor, her body paralyzed by fear. Stay silent. Survive. Speak up. Honor him. The conflict was a physical agony, a tearing in her chest. The pen touched the paper. It was now or never. In that heart-stopping moment, Laila made a choice. She took a deep, steadying breath, the air feeling thin and sharp in her lungs. She pushed off the wall she had been leaning against and walked towards table 7. Each step felt both impossibly heavy and strangely light. She was no longer a waitress approaching a table, she was a guardian approaching a gate. The world snapped back into sharp focus. She could hear the frantic beating of her own heart, the scratch of the pen nib on the thick paper, the quiet hum of the air conditioning. She reached the edge of the table just as Mr. Aljamil was beginning to form the first curve of his signature. She cleared her throat. It was a small, hesitant sound, but in the focused silence of the moment, it sounded like a gunshot. Forehead snapped up. 4 pairs of eyes fixed on her, a collective stare of annoyance and confusion. Harris's eyes narrowed into slits of pure fury. "What is it?" he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "They didn't order anything else." Laila ignored him. Her gaze was fixed entirely on Mr. Aljamil. She had to make him listen. She had to bypass the cynical gatekeeper and speak directly to the man with the dream. Summoning every ounce of her father's scholarly dignity, she looked him directly in the eye and spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear, steady, and resonant with a certainty she did not feel. And she did not speak in English. She spoke in the pure, classical Arabic her father had taught her, the language of poets and kings. "Adadhiran wakahadi ya Sayyidi," she said, her pronunciation flawless, her tone respectful but firm. "Lakin hada muzaf. Forgive my impertinence, sir. But this is fake." The silence that followed was absolute. It was as if the air itself had solidified. The other diners were oblivious, but at table 7, time had stopped. Harris stared at her, his mouth agape, utterly bewildered. Dubois and Schmidt exchanged a flicker of panicked confusion. They didn't understand the words, but they understood the gravity of the interruption. Mr. Aljamil was the most affected. His hand froze, the pen hovering over the half-formed signature. He slowly raised his head, his weary eyes locking onto hers. He saw not a waitress, but something else. He saw the ghost of an education he recognized, he heard an accent of pure, unadulterated authenticity. For a moment, he simply stared, processing the impossible scene. A waitress, speaking perfect, formal Arabic, had just called the most important deal of his life a fake. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice a quiet rumble, also in Arabic. He was testing her. Laila did not flinch. "I said this is fake, sir," she repeated, still in Arabic. "Everything about them. Their respect, their promises, and most of all, their language. It is a hollow performance." The color drained from the faces of Dubois and Schmidt as they heard Mr. Aljamil speaking Arabic back to her. The trap had been sprung. "What is going on?" Dubois demanded in English, his voice suddenly shrill, the silky charm gone. "Who is this woman? Get her away from our table!" Harris finally found his voice. "Security!" he barked, rising slightly from his seat. "Get her out of here now! Mr. Aljamil, I am so sorry, this is an unacceptable breach." But Mr. Aljamil held up a hand, silencing him. His eyes never left Laila's. "Explain," he commanded in a single Arabic word. And so she did. The floodgates opened. Standing there beside the table, in her simple black uniform, Laila transformed. The timid waitress vanished, replaced by the daughter of Dr. Omar Hassan, a scholar in her own right. The words poured out of her, not in a frantic rush, but in a calm, logical, and damning stream. She spoke in Arabic, for Mr. Al-Jamil's ears only, creating a linguistic fortress around their conversation that the two impostors could not penetrate. "Sir, from the moment they sat down, they have been speaking falsehoods," she began, her voice gaining strength with every word. "When they thought I was out of earshot, they spoke in French and German. They referred to you as the old fish on the hook. They spoke of a plan to divert the first tranche of funds as soon as the contract was signed. They believe you are a fool, sir, a naive idealist ripe for the picking." Mr. Al-Jamil's expression hardened, the hope in his eyes being rapidly replaced by a cold, sharp anger. Harris, unable to understand, watched the exchange with growing horror, seeing the shift in his boss's demeanor. "But their language," Laila continued, leaning in slightly, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "That was their most profound mistake. It is the error of the truly arrogant. They attempted to speak your language to flatter you, but they revealed their ignorance instead." She then began to deconstruct their clumsy Arabic phrase with the precision of a surgeon. "The word they use for committed multazimum. It does not exist. The correct word is multazimin. It is a subtle difference to a foreign ear, but it is the difference between a student and a fraud. Their pronunciation of the letter ein is from the throat, but it has no depth. It is the ein of someone who has only read about the sound, never lived with it. It is an actor's ein. It is a liar's ein." While she spoke, Du Bois and Schmidt were descending into open panic. "This is absurd," Schmidt exclaimed, his voice rising. "Are you going to let this servant sabotage our deal based on her delusions? She is clearly unstable." Du Bois pointed a trembling finger at Laila. "Fire her. We will sue this restaurant. We will sue you, Tariq, for this insult." Their blustering only served to confirm Laila's words. Their carefully constructed facade of calm professionalism was crumbling, revealing the desperate, cornered con men beneath. Mr. Al-Jamil listened to Laila, his gaze unwavering. He heard the truth in her analysis, the deep, ingrained knowledge that could not be faked. She was not just repeating words she had overheard, she was interpreting them, contextualizing them, exposing the rot beneath the surface. She had given him the key, and now he was unlocking the library of her knowledge. He had seen 100 polished presentations from men in expensive suits. He had heard 1,000 promises of partnership and respect. But he had never heard a truth so raw, so brave, delivered by someone with absolutely nothing to gain and everything to lose. The moment of decision rested squarely on Tariq Al-Jamil's shoulders. On one side stood his highly paid, Ivy League-educated advisor, Harris, who was now frantically whispering in his ear. "Sir, this is a disaster. We have to salvage this. Get rid of her, apologize to them, and sign the deal. We can't let a crazy waitress derail a $200 million investment. Think of the project." On the other side stood Laila, a young woman in a waitress uniform, her hands clasped tightly in front of her to stop them from shaking, her eyes filled with a terrifying mixture of fear and conviction. She had risked her livelihood, her entire future, on the hope that he would listen. He looked at the two investors. He saw their red faces, the sweat beading on Du Bois's upper lip, the way Schmidt avoided his gaze, his eyes darting towards the exit. He saw their panic, their poorly masked guilt. Then he looked at Laila. He saw the quiet dignity that radiated from her, the integrity that settled on her like a mantle. He saw his father's belief in the wisdom of humble people. He saw his own core principle, that character is the only currency that truly matters. He made his choice. Slowly, deliberately, he placed the gold-nibbed fountain pen on the table. The soft click echoed in the tense silence. He turned his body slightly, fully facing Du Bois and Schmidt, his expression now an unreadable mask of calm. Gentlemen, he said, his English suddenly as cold and sharp as glass. I find myself in need of some clarification. He then switched to a very specific, complex dialect of Gulf Arabic, a dialect rich with idiomatic expressions and legalistic phrasing related to Sharia-compliant contracts. He posed a long, intricate question about the escrow and disbursement protocols under Islamic law, a question any legitimate partner with a deep commitment to the region would be able to understand, even if they couldn't answer perfectly. The two men stared at him, their faces blank canvases of incomprehension. The color drained from their cheeks. They didn't understand a single word. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. I see, Mr. Al-Jamil said softly in English, the two words landing like hammer blows. You do not understand. The facade shattered completely. There was no more blustering, no more indignation. There was only the stark, ugly reality of their exposure. Mr. Al-Jamil discreetly pressed a button on a small device in his pocket. Within a minute 2 large, impeccably dressed men, his personal security, appeared at the table. These gentlemen are leaving, Mr. Al-Jamil said calmly. Please escort them out and retrieve their files for our legal team. I believe the authorities will be very interested in their activities. Du Bois and Schmidt were hauled to their feet, sputtering threats and protests that now sounded pathetic and hollow. As they were marched out of the restaurant, the other diners finally began to notice, their hushed whispers following the disgraced men out the door. The gilded cage had its moment of drama, and the source of it all was still standing by the table, trembling. With the con men gone, an awkward, heavy silence descended on table 7. Harris slumped back in his chair, his face pale with shock and humiliation. He stared at Laila as if seeing her for the first time, not as a piece of scenery, but as a person who had just demonstrated more perception and courage than he had. He, with all his due diligence and financial models, had been ready to approve the deal. The waitress had seen the truth he had missed. Ms. Albright, the manager, scurried over, her face a thunderous mask of professional horror. Mr. Al-Jamil, I am mortified. I cannot apologize enough for this employee's unprofessional and frankly insane behavior. She will be dealt with immediately. She is, of course, fired. Laila flinched, expecting the blow. She had done the right thing, but she knew the world didn't always reward that. She had saved him from a scam, but she had also broken every rule of her employment. She braced herself for dismissal, for the long, hard road ahead. But before the manager could continue, Mr. Al-Jamil raised his hand again. She is not fired, he said, his voice quiet but carrying an authority that was absolute. He turned his gaze to Laila, and for the first time that evening, his eyes were not weary or angry, but filled with a profound, astonished gratitude. What is your name? He asked her gently, in Arabic. Laila, sir. Laila Hassan, she replied, her voice barely a whisper. Laila Hassan, he repeated, savoring the name. You have a scholar's ear. And a warrior's courage. Where did you learn to listen like that? Trembling, Laila told him. She spoke of her father, the professor in Damascus, of the books and the poetry, of the endless lessons in phonetics and syntax. She told him of their flight, of his decline and death, of the debts he left behind and the family she was struggling to support. She spoke of her life in the shadows, of feeling invisible, of her secret practice of listening to the world as a way to keep her father's memory alive. She didn't complain or ask for pity, she simply stated the facts of her life with a quiet, heartbreaking dignity. Mr. Al-Jamil and Harris listened, utterly captivated. The story of this invisible woman, this hidden gem, unfolded in the opulent dining room, a stark contrast to the superficial wealth that surrounded them. When she finished, there were tears shimmering in Mr. Al-Jamil's eyes. He saw it all so clearly now. He hadn't been saved by a stroke of luck. He had been saved by a legacy of knowledge, by a father's love for his daughter, and by that daughter's refusal to let his teachings die. He had been so focused on building his own legacy that he had almost been destroyed by men who had none. And he had been saved by someone who was fighting desperately to protect hers. Tariq Al-Jamil looked at Laila, and he no longer saw a waitress. He saw an asset more valuable than any stock or bond. He saw the embodiment of the very principles he tried to live by: integrity, wisdom, and courage. He turned to the stunned manager. "This young woman," he said, his voice ringing with conviction, "did not cause a disruption. She prevented a catastrophe. She did not just save me $200 million. She saved my dream. You should be promoting her, not firing her." He then turned back to Laila. "Ms. Hassan," he said, switching to a formal English that included Harris in the conversation, "I have a proposition for you. I believe your talents are underutilized." Harris leaned forward, his earlier humiliation replaced by a dawning sense of awe and agreement. Laila stared, confused. "A proposition, sir? My foundation, the Al Jamil Future Foundation, has partners and projects all over the world," he explained. "We are constantly navigating complex cultural and linguistic landscapes. We vet hundreds of potential partners a year. We need someone who can listen beneath the surface of the words. Someone who can hear not just what is being said, but what is being meant. We need someone who can spot a fake a mile away." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I am not offering you a job, Laila. I am asking you to join my senior team. I want you to be my foundation's new cultural and linguistic advisor. Your job will be to listen, to advise, to travel with me, and to ensure that we are always partnering with people of honor. Your father's knowledge will not just be your shield, it will be our shield." Laila was speechless. Her mind couldn't process the words. From waitress to senior advisor. From invisibility to the inner circle. It felt like a dream. He wasn't finished. "We will, of course, settle your late father's debts. All of them. Consider it a signing bonus. We will also establish an educational trust for your siblings to ensure they can attend any university they choose. Their future is secure." Tears began to stream down Laila's face, silent, hot tears of shock, of relief, of a lifetime of grief and struggle finally being lifted. She could only nod, unable to form words. Harris, the ultimate cynic, was the one who broke the silence. He stood up, walked over to Laila, and extended his hand. "Ms. Hassan," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I was wrong. I was arrogant, and I was blind. Thank you. You taught me a lesson I will never forget." Laila, still crying, shook his hand. In that moment, a bridge was built between the cynical man of numbers and the scholarly woman of words. Mr. Al-Jamil smiled, a genuine, warm smile that transformed his tired face. "Welcome to the team, Laila." Her life had been irrevocably transformed, not by magic or by chance, but by her courageous decision to use the gift her father had given her. She was no longer a library locked from the inside. The doors had been thrown open for the whole world to see. So, we come to the end of our story, but to the beginning of Laila's. We can picture her, months later, not in a starched black uniform, but in a sharply tailored suit, standing beside Mr. Al-Jamil in a high-tech boardroom in Riyadh or a conference hall in Geneva. Her voice is no longer hesitant but confident, her insights sharp, her linguistic analysis saving her new employer from countless unseen pitfalls and guiding his foundation toward genuine, honorable partnerships. She is no longer invisible. She is seen, she is valued, and she is powerful, not because of wealth, but because of the knowledge she carried within her all along. The story of Laila and Mr. Al-Jamil is a modern fable, but its lesson is as old as time. It reminds us that worth is not determined by a uniform, a job title, or a bank account. True value is often hidden in the quietest corners, in the people we are conditioned to overlook. It is the wisdom of the janitor who has seen a company's true culture after hours, the insight of the delivery driver who knows the rhythms of a city better than any urban planner, the courage of the waitress who listens when no one else will. Our world pressures us to look up, to focus on the people at the top of the pyramid. But the strength of any structure is in its foundation, in the stones that are often buried and unseen. Laila was one of those foundational stones, and by having the courage to speak, she saved the entire building from collapse. So I ask you again, the question from the beginning, Who are you not seeing? Think about your day. The barista who knows your coffee order by heart, the security guard who greets you every morning, the cleaning staff who make your workspace clean and safe. Each one of them is a library of experiences, a universe of potential. What hidden knowledge, what unique perspective do they hold? The greatest tragedies are not the loud failures, but the quiet, undiscovered geniuses who live and die without ever being given a chance to share their gifts with the world. Let Laila's story be a reminder. A reminder to listen more carefully, to look more deeply, and to value every single person you meet. For you never know when the quietest voice in the room is about to speak the most important truth. Share this story with someone you know. Remind them that heroes don't always wear capes, sometimes they wear an apron. And comment below with a time you witnessed someone overlooked show their incredible, hidden talent. Let's celebrate the invisible people who hold our world together, one courageous act at a time. Look around. Someone near you has a gift that could change everything. All you have to do is be willing to see it,